Welcome back to NPC Next Portable Console, the show about the games we take with us. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Brendon Bigley. Hey, Brendon.
Hello, John. The terrible twosome today.
It is the terrible twosome. Federico is not here today. He has had a scheduling conflict. That happens in the summer sometimes when people have. It's partly my fault because I'm going to be traveling, so we're recording a little early, and it just didn't work out. But I think we can hold down the fort, Brendon.
I think we can hold down the fort, too. We were just saying right before we hit record, like, I'm surrounded by exactly 9 gaming devices on my desk, all simultaneously. Actually 10, because I forgot my Switch is right here also, because I have my Switch docked here.
I'm impressed. I think I've only got 5.
This show has become a problem in my life. No,
it has.
I've hit my limit, John. I said to my partner the other day, I was just like, I think after this last device comes in, I'm done buying devices for a little bit. Unless you out there, listener, run some kind of gaming device company and would like to send us some, then we will check them out, definitely. But I think I need to chill out and just like experience the stuff I have and like get more in the weeds with this stuff, you know?
Yeah, definitely. A pause is good, but never say never, Brendon, because, you know,
I can't do it.
In I don't know, 90 days, we'll have a whole new crop of ANEOs and Anbernics. But I actually did, speaking of more devices, I purchased something this morning before we started recording.
Oh, did you?
I did. I ordered the Powkiddy V10. I just couldn't resist the transparent purple and the GBA, optimized screen. Those were the things that really got me. Plus, right now it's still on sale for $40 on their website.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it takes I think they say 12 to 20 days to get to you, and I'm about to go on a trip. So that's just about perfect to have it here shortly after I get back and before we record again. So
okay, nice.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that coming.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know about the V10, we talked about it a little bit in the last episode.
We did.
But since we recorded that episode, a lot of people have gotten their hands on them and seem to like it a whole bunch, specifically for GBA. Like really, really positive for GBA.
Right, because it's basically pixel doubled for the GBA.
Yeah.
The other thing, speaking of surrounded by devices, I saw Federico didn't tell us about this, but he just updated his Mac Stories setup page.
Yes.
And he bought this little aluminum thing that has slots in it. It's supposed to be for like laptops and other devices like that, but he got it for handhelds. And I thought, interesting purchase. I may have to look at one of these. Just kind of, it's like a bookshelf for retro gaming handhelds.
Oh man, yeah. I'm like, the second I buy that, John, the second I am admitting that I have too many of these. You know what I mean? Like that, buying that to me is an admission more than anything else.
Well, the first step is to admit that you have a problem, Brendon.
That's true. That's true. I'll probably end up getting one if I'm being totally honest.
No, I looked at it, and the only reason I didn't order it is because I'm about to travel, and it would get here while I was away. So I actually put it in my cart. I will check it out when I get home.
Yeah.
All right, so we should follow up with some stuff from past episodes, and I think this was from last episode. We talked all about things like iPhone gaming and Android, the mobile stuff. And there has been a string of stories over the past month or two about how AAA games are just not doing well on the iPhone. And the latest one is about Resident Evil 7, which was written up on Kotaku and says that it made something like $20,000. Like only 2,000 people or so have actually downloaded and paid for the in-app purchase, which I think is $20. Now, I take this with a little bit of a grain of salt because I think sometimes that these statistics are derived from things like app figures, which aren't always necessarily super accurate. This is not like firsthand data coming out of, Capcom or Apple or anything like that. It's just gleaned from a third-party source looking at download numbers and trying to figure out how many people are buying the in-app purchase. But just as a directional number and kind of an indicator of how this game is doing, whether that number is the exact number or not, it is pretty rough.
Yeah, the same has been true from what we've seen, at least from these kinds of figures from, as we were saying, Village and Resident Evil 4 Remake. Both of those I find a little bit more surprising. Like the Resident Evil 7 not selling super well, I think makes a little bit more sense to me, as it was a game that came out, I think, in 2017, 2018. It's like kind of an older
Right.
title. You know, how
Right.
much demand is there to be playing Resident Evil 7 right now in the first place, much less on your iPhone? But still, there is something to be said about the fact that I think this strategy is not really panning out for a lot of these developers who are porting their games with like the official game porting toolkit scenario that Apple, I think, has kind of outlined as their preferred method for developers of this size to get their games on platforms like the iPhone and the Mac. And I think it raises a bunch of questions about, okay, what's next then? You know, if this is not the strategy, then what can Apple do if they want to continue taking gaming seriously, quote unquote, which I know is like kind of a goof at this point, the idea of Apple taking gaming seriously. But I think as they continue to go to developers like Capcom and Ubisoft and, you know, Kojima Productions and say, hey, we want your games on our devices, to me, that does indicate that they're starting to poke at something. You know, I think they're recognizing the amount of, just straight up the amount of money they could be making if they like seriously invested in games as a medium. And it's a huge drop. It's just so weird, John. I have such a hard time not going on like a rant about this specific topic every time we talk about it. It's just so weird because like this was a Steve Jobs thing. Also, he wanted games to be synonymous with the Mac in a really big way. Like Halo was almost an exclusive for the Mac. He's, as we talked about on the show, he's the reason that emulators are like legal in the first place because he helped develop a PlayStation emulator. It's like so wild to me that of all of the things that Apple could be investing in, gaming is not really one they're taking super seriously. I think the answer, and I'm curious how you feel about this, I think the answer is something similar to what Steam is doing with the Steam Deck, where they have Proton, which is their compatibility layer to allow Windows games to play on Linux, on Steam OS. And I'm wondering if we're going to get to a point where the game porting toolkit, specifically the second version that is launching towards the end of the year, if that in conjunction with something like Whiskey or a purchase of a company like Whiskey would allow them to just let people play Windows games on the Mac. And I know that that's a little bit of like a dubious ask in some ways, because of course they're going to need those games to get listed on the App Store and go through app review. And like, there's just going to be a lot of hoops there. But I'm wondering if that's the easiest thing. Like, you already built the compatibility layer, let people use it.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. It is a bit of a square peg in a round hole. I mean, Apple is just not built for that in terms of the way the App Store works. However, there are commonalities in the technology underlying both Proton and the game porting toolkit. So I think that that's possible if they want to do that. Obviously, Whiskey's out there, and other people are playing with that toolkit, even if they're not developers, just because they want to play their Windows games on a Mac. So I think it is a potential solution. What's troubling about the stories like this, I think, is that I think part of the sell to the game publishers is, okay, the Mac market isn't huge, sure, and the iPad market not so huge either. They're they're roughly the same.
Yes.
But the iPhone market is massive.
Yeah.
And so that attracts companies like Capcom. And if they're not able to sell these games on the iPhone, I don't think that that interest is going to last. I mean, I assume that Apple is doing something to incentivize these companies to bring these games to its platform in the first instance, but I don't know. I think that the interest will wane pretty quickly if it gets out there in the in the industry that you really can't make more than 20 grand. I mean, think about that. I mean, the costs associated even with the game porting toolkit to bring this game to the iPhone, I'm sure far exceeded $20,000.
My question then becomes, does this become a pivot, not even on the like Apple executive layer and on the AAA layer, but more so in the indie space, where indie publishers start to take notice of this and say, 20,000 doesn't sound that great to Capcom, but to a developer that releases, one or two indie games a year at most, maybe even less, that's probably worth it in some ways to add another 20,000 on top of whatever you were selling through on Steam and elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, especially if they make the toolkit in a way that it really is a little, there's going to be work involved no matter what you do. But if they can make it easy enough for those developers where they don't have to dedicate multiple people to porting over to Apple's platforms, then it really could be something like an tool for indies, and you could find Apple in a place where they're a lot like Sony was with the Vita courting the indies
Yes.
to bring them over to the platform, right?
Speaking my language, John. You're speaking my language. That's the dream.
I'm still waiting for my Vita from Federico. He's not here, so I'm gonna complain a little bit.
Yeah. Bug him on Discord after this.
I know. I gotta get over to Italy. I think he's gonna make me come to Italy, but it might be worth it. I mean, I'll have a pizza and a Vita, so that would be a great combination.
Oh man, wow, I love that. That's the episode title, definitely.
Definitely. So, I want to transition over to another topic we talked about, which is our friend the Anbernic RG35XX-SP, which we talked a little bit last time about how we saw another story that someone's SP overheated. And I actually this morning before we recorded was looking through Reddit and saw someone who took their SP apart, put it under a heat lamp, and ran a game continuously to prove that it wouldn't overheat.
Wow.
And there were hundreds of comments under this post. And it was interesting because, it does, at least once again, it's only one data point. I mean, it's one person's SP, but it points to the fact, I think the point that they were trying to make was that it's not a design issue with the board, it might be faulty components.
Right.
And to me, that's
issue.
a little, yeah, exactly. And to me, that's kind of what I assumed was the case anyway. And I don't think it necessarily means people should feel better about the SP just because it's faulty parts and not a design issue. It probably means that it means that it's less widespread. And I guess I caution people that you and I are not electrical engineers. And as you said last episode, we don't really understand why it is these things are doing this in any kind of meaningful way. I do know from personal experience that I have had various devices, not all of them, handheld gaming devices, that do require a very specific cable and plug in order to actually charge.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the case with the SP. But, I don't know. I just mention it only because the debate rages on, and now it's becoming a little bit of a team Anbernic versus team everybody else. I think a little bit. It's getting a little heated there in the Reddit.
Hopefully not so heated, John. I saw another maybe this is the same person, maybe it's a different person, but I did see somebody on, I think it was the Anbernic subreddit, who is an electrical engineer and was actually putting it through its paces and hadn't found anything super out of the ordinary either. So it does seem to be on a device by device basis. And what's so funny is between the last episode that we recorded and this one, I actually noticed that my unit is faulty also in a way that I hadn't picked up on just because I hadn't watched enough videos, I guess, or like seen enough images. But there's a piece of my hinge missing, which I never noticed. But it's
really,
yeah. So on one side of the device, there's like a little like circular cover that covers up the holes where the screws are for the hinge. And on the other side, I do not have that cover. And I thought that was there specifically so you could unscrew it very easily. But it turns out there was supposed to be a screw cover there. So I think there's just QA issue. I think it's just a QA problem, which, is also disappointing and troublesome when the device is exploding in some people's houses. But I'm glad it's not every device, but it's still like withholding me, or it's preventing me from wanting to super recommend it to people right now. I'm hoping that there's like a revision or something before the end of the year.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of the same way. I mean, you don't want to mess around with this kind of stuff. And as we said last time, I just kind of make sure that I'm right there when it's charging, and then I unplug it, and that's it. I don't leave it sitting on my nightstand at night or in another room when I'm not home or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got less news for today, but we have seen some news coming out of the handheld market over the past couple of weeks. And one of them I want to talk to you about first off is the Analogue Pocket, which is now available in aluminum for the low price of $500.
Wow. Where do I sign?
I saw that and I was, I am not super price sensitive when it comes to gadgets, but I saw that and I was like, who is going to buy this?
Yeah. Man, this is just like astronomical. And I think the best way to illustrate that this price is too high is that right now, at least, who knows if this is true when this episode comes out, but right now, if I go to the Analogue website and try and buy one of these, every colorway is still available, despite
Yep.
them saying they're extremely limited. Actually, I lied to you. The indigo one is sold out. That's the only one that's sold out right now.
Okay.
But the other three are still on sale. They've been on sale for like just over a week now. Generally speaking, with analog devices, they sell out pretty much instantaneously.
In minutes at most.
Yes. So I think the fact that all of these are still in stock is a pretty clear sign that this price is way too high. And also, I wouldn't go. I mean, I don't want to make any grand statements here, John, but I do think the fact that there are devices like the ones we talk about on a weekly basis that are coming out and kind of superseding what Analogue is like offering with the Pocket is maybe starting to affect the desire for something like the Analogue Pocket.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's interesting. It's an interesting strategy from Analog's standpoint. It's like, faced with this competition, what do? Do they make something that's more affordable? No, they go the opposite direction. They go even higher end and say, yeah, it's aluminum and it's $500. That's, to me, that's not really a smart strategy. But because we've got, for instance, we've got the Funny Plane FPGA
Yes.
for Game Boy Color, which I think that kit, I mean, you got to get other parts and so forth, but you can do it for under $200.
Yeah.
I think the kit itself with the screen and the board is like 70 or 80, something like that. And then Palmer Luckey, who, obviously has got his issues from a political standpoint. He's doing this mod retro chromatic thing for $200, which also is metal. It's some kind of magnesium alloy. And supposedly has, it's also FPGA and supposed to have a really nice screen and everything. There's not been a lot of information about that, but also it's $300 less than this one. So I really don't get this device at all.
Yeah, I'll say that I understand it from the perspective of I saw the press release and thought, man, I want one of those things. Like that was my first thought. Like literally second one, I was, okay, what's the price? I want to pick one of these up because I've always wanted Analog Pocket. Just I think more for curiosity than anything else. Also, I've played around with one in person. I really like the feel of it. I think the screen is beautiful, and the idea of an aluminum one is actually really appealing to me. But $500 is way past my point of like impulse purchasing on something like this.
Yeah. I think that they're starting to get a lot of blowback, I think, from this kind of thing. I mean, people get frustrated by this false scarcity, I think, of these devices, as well as the fact that they cost so much. And this is just kind of pushing those buttons all over again.
Yeah. I think over time, I've seen more and more people start to bristle at Analog's strategy in terms of that scarcity. And I think this is just like maybe the breaking point for people. Like maybe this is it.
Yeah. That said, I did buy a Super NT at the end of last year. I mean, they said they weren't going to make it anymore, and I picked it up because it's just a really convenient, handy way to connect it to a TV and play my SNES games.
Yeah, totally. I'll also, just while we're talking about other metal Game Boys, I'll give a shout out to a YouTube channel, Your Cool Uncle Marissa, who put together a thing called the Gotcha SP. Which now has a metal edition that you can put together. I just watched that video the other day.
Yeah, I've seen that. It looks kind of cool. I was definitely
cool.
attracted to that one. Yeah, very nice, very nice.
Anyway,
so the other news story that we thought we would talk about, and maybe we saved this. Maybe we should. Do you want to dive right into your use of the Nothing CMF Phone 1? Because the other thing that came out this week, the news story that I wanted to talk about, was a review by David Pierce on The Verge of the Xreal Beam Pro. And this, Xreal makes the AR glasses, the Air Pro. And this Beam Pro is a device that's really just an Android phone that connects the glasses and allows you to play games on the Google Play Store. And it also has a sort of AR version of of Android built into it, so that you can kind of see your games and your other apps in, up in front of you in your environment as you wear the glasses. And I think David wasn't really that impressed with the device. It's $200, just like the phone, but while I think he liked the ability to take spatial photos with it, the UI itself that they overlay on top of stock Android wasn't so great and was pretty buggy.
Yeah, this was an interesting idea when it was announced, because I think specifically I saw I think it was Sam Byford over at multicore.blog who wrote about this in a way that really started to kind of sound appealing to me, which was like, this is a modern day version of an iPod in some ways. Like, you don't even really need to go out and buy the glasses if you don't want to. You could just use this as kind of like your in your pocket media device if you don't want to use your main smartphone for that, which I thought was kind of an appealing idea in some ways, but it seems like the power is not quite there. And specifically also not quite there for the glasses, which feels like kind of, a huge swing and a miss for exactly, a device built for specifically one other device. It's kind of weird that it's not super great at powering that one other device. If it technically is an accessory to the glasses, which I think is probably a good time to go into the Nothing CMF One, which I brought up on the last episode. The CMF One is a device by Nothing, which is a phone manufacturer that's been, I would say, making some waves over the past couple of years. They spun out, I think it's the same founder as OnePlus, and it's essentially another shot at doing what OnePlus was established to do, which is making kind of more budget phones that don't really compromise at all on any of the specs that you would want out of those phones. And very quickly, I think Nothing kind of leaned more into the design angle than the budget angle, which meant that those phones also became expensive. So here's now a third try at this idea of having a budget phone with the CMF sub-brand, which stands for color, material, and finish. I talked in the last episode about this idea that the power inside this $200 device, which is the same price as you were saying as the Xreal Beam, is just about the equivalent of the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, which is also $200. The processor is almost exactly the same. I think the processor in the Retroid Pocket is the Dimensity 7100, and this is the 7300. And the 3 does not mean that it is more powerful than the 100. They're just kind of better at different things a little bit.
Okay.
But they're almost equivalent. So they're almost exactly the same internally, which is pretty wild. The big difference, obviously, is that the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro is a dedicated gaming device. It has a bunch of buttons. It has, everything you would need to play a game built into it. And the CMF has the big, huge 6.7-inch OLED screen with 120 hertz refresh rate, which is, at least as far as I've seen, probably one of the best screens on any handheld device, if you want to consider it a handheld device. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. That's why I wanted to pick one up initially, was I think as I start to mess with more of these devices and as I start to get more embedded in them or in these spaces, it started to occur to me that maybe the best place to look for the next best gaming handheld of 2024 was like outside of the realm of actually dedicated handheld devices. So when I read all these specs for the CMF One, it just kind of like fired off every synapse in my brain simultaneously, and I just ordered one immediately. I got one in like a nice mint green, which
that's a good color. I like that.
It's a great color. If you don't, the other thing worth mentioning about the CMF One, because it's not being pitched as a gaming device, is that it has all of these really easy access screws on the back, so you can unscrew the back plate and attach a bunch of different things to it, like lanyards and kickstands, and you can get new back plates. And I'm sure they're gonna. I think there's like a wallet you can like screw into the back. I'm sure they'll release more stuff. But I got this mint green one. I feel no desire to change the way it looks at all. It has like a really nice matte finish, and the screen is amazing. Like it really is, I think, everything that I wanted it to be. I got it, and they asked me when I was setting it up, do you want to include a SIM card? Do you want to do all this stuff? Absolutely not. I'm going to have it with the internet off pretty much at all times. It's going to be basically a dedicated gaming device for me. I threw it directly into my Backbone One, and I just kind of carried that around with me in my bag for a couple days. I set it up with, all of the emulators you could think of, all of the streaming apps you could think of, all of the dedicated Android games that you could think of, like Zenless Zone Zero and Genshin and all this stuff that I think people use to
Sure.
like stress test all these devices. And honestly, it doesn't really break a sweat with most of the stuff I throw at it. I think the biggest discrepancy between this and something like the Odin 2, which I have, which is obviously way more powerful, is like Zenless Zone Zero doesn't look as good as it does on there or my iPhone or my iPad, but it still plays just fine. It's still playing at 30 or 60 frames per second, depending on what settings I'm setting it at. Pretty much every emulator, going into Dolphin and playing stuff on the GameCube, like I'm bumping that stuff up to 2 or 3x resolution. Same thing with PSP. 3DS works wonderfully. PS2 works wonderfully. It's all just like good. It just works really well. And I think it raises a question for me. Is there a world in which this just becomes kind of a better device for most people because it's going to be updated with new versions of Android for the foreseeable future?
Right.
Which a lot of these other devices do not.
Exactly. And this is this is one of those core topics that I think we're going to end up revisiting a lot in this show, which is, are the kind of the dedicated Linux devices that we've been talking about a lot, the retro handhelds, what are they better at, and where do they go in the face of something like this? Because I am kind of split between the Odin 2 and these dedicated devices, and I think there's still a place for the dedicated devices.
Yeah.
But there is a lot to be said for having a device that can do anything. It can be your everything device, or you can do, which I know you've done a lot of, with your Odin, your original one, which is just make it a streaming device. Kind of dedicate it to one corner of your gaming life.
Yeah.
But it can also be everything if you really want it to be, and that's a pretty powerful message, I think. And not to mention the fact that it's Android, and everybody has a mobile phone pretty much and knows how to set up a mobile phone. And dealing with Android is a lot easier than dealing with installing, flashing memory cards and installing your own OS on whatever it happens to be, whether it's a Miyoo Mini or whatever.
Yeah, I have found over the years that I definitely gravitate more towards Android devices for emulation than anything else. And I know that that can be limiting. There are a bunch of emulators that are just better suited for Linux than they are for Android. But I just find the ease of messing around with, as you were saying, something that just feels like a phone and using a touchscreen for navigation. It all feels more premium to me.
Yeah, it's not that there's not setup involved. There still is setup involved. You have to still go find the emulators. You still have to kind of tweak the settings to your liking and that kind of thing. But because you're dealing with something like the Google Play Store, and you're dealing with just, I guess, the familiarity of being on a mobile phone, it just feels easier. I know I definitely spent a lot of time messing around with my Odin 2 when I first got it. But once I had those apps in place and had a front end that I liked, I haven't really touched it much other than adding new games to it.
Yeah. I've been the same way with my Odin, honestly, since I first got it. And as you said, I've been using it a lot for game streaming and also for Android games as well. And it's just kind of remained static the whole time, whereas all of these other devices like the SP and some of the other ones that we're going to talk about are just kind of like tinker machines more than anything else. So now that I have this Nothing phone, I should also mention, just to clear the air a bit, I didn't just buy this as a dedicated gaming device. I usually like having a backup phone just in case something happens to my iPhone.
Sure.
And also, I occasionally do need to test Android stuff for my job. Just have things on both phones. So this is more like this is going to sit in the background because my last backup phone was the Pixel 3a, which I got years and years and years ago. So that thing is pretty old at this point. And I have noticed that has started to kind of cough and break a sweat when I start to throw things at it. So the CMF one is the replacement there, and the price is definitely right at $200.
Does it have an eSIM, or is it a physical SIM slot?
It does have a physical SIM slot, which I was kind of surprised by. Which is interesting. It has pretty much everything you would want out of a phone. And I'll be honest, John, it's the first time in a long time that I've picked up an Android phone and thought to myself, like, I would switch to this. There's a world in which I would switch from iPhone to this. If I didn't like iOS so much, I think, there's a world in which this could be my phone.
As a backup phone, though, it's a little disappointing that it's not an eSIM, because you could easily just like when you wanted to switch to it for a month or something, you can get one of those eSIM programs where it's only like, it costs you like $20 for a bunch of data for a month or whatever it is.
Hey, I haven't looked into it too much. It's possible that it also has eSIM support. I'm not super sure.
Okay.
I will say though, it is missing NFC, which I think is huge. And is the one thing that everybody seems to be knocking it for is like, you can't use it on a daily basis, I think, in society today in some places, especially if you live in a place like New York, like I do. I'm using tap to pay on pretty much like everything I do all the time. But that said, I mean, it's a great phone. It as a dedicated gaming device is great. As I was saying, I threw it in the Backbone. That was awesome. I also threw it in the GameSir Galileo G8, our favorite, I think, controller amongst the three of us.
Why is it called the Galileo? I'm still trying to figure that out. I mean, all their other devices are just letters and numbers, but this one is the Galileo.
I have no idea, John. Honestly, it just makes me laugh so much to say out loud that
it's the fanciest one of the bunch, I guess.
It's the fanciest one of the bunch. I just saw that they released the G8 Plus, which seems to be the exact same thing, but it's Bluetooth instead of USB-C.
Okay.
It has a couple little tweaks here and there. It also comes in black, which looks nice. But anyway, I threw it in there, and man, with this screen at this size, especially when you're throwing stuff, like enabling widescreen patches on things like GameCube and PS2, it looks amazing. And with Android games and stuff, like it's really stellar. It is definitely the best screen I own, I think, to be playing games on right now, outside of maybe my iPhone. But I think one of the big things for me is just kind of like, I want to step away from using my iPhone as a gaming device as much as I possibly can, especially in a world where we have a podcast like this, where we're playing so many games and testing so many devices. Like, just falling back to my iPhone feels like a little bit of a little bit of like a running away from what I really want to be doing. But
right.
I am enjoying the Nothing CMF Phone 1 a whole bunch as a Android device, but also specifically as a gaming device. I think it is really stellar.
Yeah, it sounds great. And I mean, I think that really, when it comes down to it, it's the screen and the price really can't be beat, because you've got enough power to run all the games you already mentioned. Yeah. And, all those systems. And that at $200, that's a really good deal.
It is a really good deal. Yeah. As I was saying, the thing that it stands up closest to is the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, which I think, in my eyes, until now, was the best budget game, or budget, quote unquote. It was the best gaming device in terms of a price to performance ratio. And if you already have a controller lying around, like a G8 or like a Backbone 1 or something like that,
right,
I would honestly, just because of the screen alone, recommend this over the Retroid Pocket. Because I just find the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro. I don't know. Have you had a Retroid in your past?
No, I haven't. That's one system that I've not tried before.
I had the Retroid Pocket 3 Pro, or just 3, I forget. I think it was the 3 Pro. Okay. And I liked it a lot. It came in a beautiful atomic purple colorway, which I really loved.
Nice.
And it was nice for a while, but over time, the flatness of it all and the lack of ergonomics really started to get to me. And as I started to try and play more high-end stuff, because I was playing a lot of Dreamcast specifically on that, because I was prepping for a big episode last year for Into the Aether, and it eventually got to the point where I just didn't like picking it up anymore, because I knew that I could only play it for like 30 or 40 minutes before my hands started to feel weird about it. And now, I think if you were to pose the question, would you get this or the Nothing CMF Phone 1? I think I would say the CMF Phone 1, specifically because I'm throwing it in the Galileo, because that controller feels so good in the hands. I'm not running into that Retroid problem at all.
Right. Yeah, and that is the advantage of using a mobile phone for your gaming, is you can kind of pick the controller you want, whatever feels comfortable for you. And some of them, there's a lot of choice there now, especially now that all the phones are USB-C. You have a lot of options. I think this is now this put this right next to that Analogue Pocket Aluminum, and let's look at the prices and what each can do. And I think you're it's a pretty easy decision. I do want to ask you one other thing about this: is have you installed any front ends for this yet?
Yeah, I've tried a couple actually. So weirdly enough, I'm using a launcher right now called Niagara Launcher, which is not specifically made for gaming, but it's supposed to be a really minimal launcher for Android, which I've always kind of seen from afar on Android users' phones and was a little bit jealous of, because I would love something like this on iPhone. But what it essentially does is it just creates a home screen that has a list of your top 8 apps. and you can pin as many of those 8 as you want. But the idea is honestly really similar to Siri suggestions on that widget on the iPhone home screen, where it'll just kind of start to learn what stuff you're using the most and then put that front and center. So I'm actually using that right now, which I like a lot. But I also have used Emulation Station, and I have that set up, which I do like a lot. That's a little bit of a finicky one to get running because you have to go to a person's Patreon and then pay them $5 once, and then they give you the download link. It's a little bit of a weird situation to get it, but it is worth it. It's really great. And I bounce back and forth between Daijisho, which I think looks really pretty but has a lot of issues, and Beacon, which I don't think looks very pretty but works very well. I have found that there's not really a launcher that I'm super gravitated towards yet. They all have drawbacks in a way that just makes me stick to something like Niagara, which is more made for phones, but allows me to at least get into the apps very quickly so I can just play games.
Yeah, interesting. I've not ever used Beacon, but I have used Daijisho, and I'd like it. I mean, I think it looks good. Yeah, it does have some issues. I haven't gotten around to Emulation Station yet on Android. I did join the Patreon. I have the link.
Oh, nice.
I just haven't gotten around to putting it on my Odin. It's one of those weekend projects that I need to get to this summer.
The most recent version of Emulation Station, I think it just released towards the end of June, if I'm not mistaken. Includes finally the ability to actually set it as your home screen on your Android device, which is nice because before you needed to do this like weird workaround where you downloaded another app that allowed you to set other apps as your launcher. But now it's just built into Emulation Station, which is nice. And as far as I know, there is also, and I haven't figured it out yet, but there is a way to get into your Android apps as well, because Emulation Station supports most consoles, but not all of them. Like Vita, for example, with the Vita 3K emulator is not present in Emulation Station right now. So you need some way to still access Android apps.
Daijisho does that. Yeah.
Yes, really well. So does Beacon. Both of those launchers, I think, do a really great job of that. Emulation Station, not so much yet, but I think when it gets there, that'll probably be my go-to.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. It's good to hear. I'll definitely check that out in the next couple of weeks, maybe before the next time we record.
Yeah, I'd recommend it. But hey, if you're thinking about picking up a Nothing CMF One, I would recommend it, which I'm kind of surprised by. But it works really, really well.
I'm very, very tempted. Very, very tempted. I mean, it comes down to the price. I mean, it's still $200 is not nothing, even though it is a nothing phone. But it's certainly more than the $40 V10 that I just purchased. So it's a little bit. It's more of a deliberate purchase than an impulse purchase. But
yes,
it's significantly less than like an Odin, for instance, which maybe we should talk about that next.
Yeah. So that's kind of the big elephant in the room, or maybe the mini elephant in the room compared to the CMF One is I think I mentioned a couple episodes ago, pre-ordered the Ayn Odin2 Mini, which literally arrived last night. It was supposed to show up about a week ago, and then just didn't. And then they just kept changing the delivery date to whatever day it was until it finally showed up, which is classic.
Didn't DHL tell you that it was magically going to arrive in New York from Hong Kong in like
10 hours? Yeah, it was remarkable, the hubris on DHL. But yeah, it took a while to show up, and it finally showed up last night. I will definitely go more in depth on it in the next episode. I will say immediately though, we started this show by talking about how we're all Vita guys, and I'm holding the Odin2 Mini right next to the Vita right now. They're almost the exact same size, which is amazing. And even just in the process of setting the thing up last night, which of course takes hours and hours, at least for the way that I like to set this stuff up, it is amazing. It is going to be my go-to, I think, probably, as long as the ergonomics don't really get in the way. If the smaller form factor starts to bump up against me in the same way something like the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro did, or 3 Pro in my case, which I just learned they're also the exact same size, the Odin2 Mini and the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, which is kind of wild.
Oh, okay.
So if you're curious about which one you should get, I think it'll be more of a price thing than anything else. But for me, somebody who loves the Vita, the idea of another company just making a Vita is just too much for me to ignore. So I had to pick one up. I love the Odin 2 that I already own. That thing is, I would say, and I'm curious if you feel the same way. I think the Odin 2 is kind of the centerpiece of my entire gaming experience right now. Like, if I can be playing something on the Odin 2, I would prefer to play that on the Odin 2 in a lot of cases.
Yeah, it really is for me too in a lot of ways, because it's just so versatile in terms of what you can do. I mean, it's just, I can jump into my an emulator, or I can stream something from my PS5, whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
Play an Android game. It's just, you've got so many options with that device that it's it is definitely a centerpiece device for me too.
Yeah, it's like my whole ecosystem kind of revolves around the Odin 2, or at least it has for a while. And the idea that I can have that exact same experience, but in the shape of the PlayStation Vita, is literally a dream for me.
Yeah, that is pretty compelling. How is the screen? Because I know the screen is like it's a brighter screen, right?
Yes, it's a mini LED. It is absolutely gorgeous. There are two issues with it that I know people bring up a lot. Number one, this is just inherent to mini LED as a display technology, but blooming and ghosting. Sorry, blooming and vignetting.
Right.
Which sound, I mean, they should cancel each other out. I think it seems to be how, at least that's how my brain considers it, is like, okay, well, if one of them is making things darker and one of them is making things brighter, then shouldn't those two things cancel each other out? And the answer, dear listener, is no, they do not. You can definitely tell that both are happening. And personally, I think it looks very cool. I know some people find it to be like an imperfection, quote unquote, in the display. And for me, I'm like, oh yeah, it reminds me weirdly of a CRT in some ways.
Sure.
It just kind of has these like fun imperfections that I think in some ways make it feel more nostalgic, especially when you're like, when I was booting up pretty much every single console, like SNES and Game Boy and all that kind of stuff, and just setting up RetroArch and whatever last night, I was like, man, this stuff looks really, really, really good with the mini LED problems. I think it actually aids the experience in some ways.
It's an interesting mixture of nostalgia, because you've got something that looks like a Vita, and then it's got the vignetting and the blooming that maybe works better with even the older systems. It's kind of, it's an interesting mix.
Yeah, I think the bigger thing for me is going to be the screen size, because the Odin, I believe, has a 6-inch screen, and the Odin Mini has a 5-inch screen, and that's a pretty significant difference between the two.
Yeah, it is.
But I haven't run into any issues with it yet. In my brief testing, I thought it looked totally fine. I was messing around with Elden Ring a little bit, streaming it from my Xbox, and it was okay. Like, I didn't feel like that game has some pretty small text, and I didn't feel like I couldn't read any of it. So far, so good for me. I think, honestly, though, again, I'll talk about it more in the next episode when I've gotten more time with it. But I still think I would recommend the Odin 2 to most people. It really is like, are you a Vita sicko? Did you love the Vita? Do you want a Vita again? Well, then this exists for $100 more.
Right. Yeah, no, I think I can totally see that. And I know that you play a lot on the subway and other places on the go. That makes the Mini maybe even more attractive to you, besides just the nostalgia of it, right?
Yeah. You nailed it exactly, John. This is the biggest thing for me, is the Odin 2 is just a little bit too big for me to feel comfortable putting in my bag.
Yeah,
and
it is a little big.
I got to be honest, the Odin Mini is like the exact size of a thing I would want to put in my bag. So I'm excited about it. It also, because I pre-ordered it, it came with a little carrying case that is really, really nice. That doesn't add to the bulk too much also.
Good.
So yeah, I'm feeling very confident that I'm going to like this thing a whole bunch. But stay tuned, dear listener, and we'll talk about it more next time.
All right. Yeah, I'm really curious to see if you gravitate more to the Nothing phone or to the Mini over time. That's what I'm interested in seeing.
I think it'll probably be the Mini, if I'm being totally
Yeah,
honest.
yeah.
I think the Nothing phone will, over time, at least for me and my uses, end up being relegated to backup Android phone. Instead of gaming device. But
that's the thing about phones for gaming too. I think that they're gonna suffer a little bit because they're a phone.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, I think in the case of something like the CMF, it is powerful enough to just be that device for you if you want it to be.
Yeah.
And at the price point, I don't know if there's anything else I would recommend specifically, unless you're bumping up to getting something like the Odin, which is, $100, $150 more at starting price.
Yeah, and it helps if you're using it as a dedicated device as opposed to using something like an iPhone, which you're also getting, you're relying on for your notifications from your friends and family and work colleagues and all that stuff.
Exactly.
It makes it a little harder with something like your main mobile phone.
It's why I don't like reading on my phone. Like I don't read a lot of books through the Books app on my phone anymore. I used to every once in a while, but you start getting notifications, even just like, it's kind of sad to say, but even just the knowledge that there are other apps on your phone makes me want to bail out of the book and like go open up another app. So, you and I have talked about this in the past, but I think when you have dedicated devices for specific things, it makes things a lot easier in your life in terms of, what you're taking out and what you're using on a given basis. I have dedicated gaming devices. I have my phone, which is just for communicating with people. And then I have, for reading at least, I have the Books Palma now, which you have one also, right?
I do. I love it. I'm taking it with me on my trip because for exactly that reason, I want to, especially that since I'm running iOS betas and my phone's battery is not doing great, having a dedicated reading device with me is going to be nice because it'll mean I won't be wearing down my battery as much.
Yes.
But the dedicated device argument works until you're surrounded by 9 devices, Brendon.
It's true.
Then
right.
maybe it starts coming apart at the seams. But that's the whole tension, and that's a lot about what this show is all about too. So.
Yeah, for people in the keyboard community, the mechanical keyboard community, which I'm not a part of, to be clear.
Nor am I.
Yeah, but I have 2 mechanical keyboards. One that I bought, which I liked a lot, and then realized hurt my wrist, so I got a different one, and now I'm totally fine. And I did not go down that rabbit hole, and thank God. But I know from people in that community that there's this idea of like the end game keyboard. There's the end game device. There's like the one keyboard that when you got it, everything would be fine. You would not feel the need ever again. I experienced that a lot talking to photographers around New York City. They all feel that way about Leica cameras. Like if they get a Leica, they're like, then I never have to worry again. It's like, no, man, you're going to be collecting lenses now. The same is definitely true of this space. And I know it's interesting because I feel like these devices, and this is maybe a conversation for another day, but I feel like these devices are starting to become prevalent enough that there are people who are, I would say, less tech inclined who are starting to get more excited about these. Like I'm starting to have people at my job start to ask me about these devices and recommend these devices to them. And I think that's one of the benefits of having such a huge landscape of them is that, somebody asked me the other day, they gave me a budget of like $150 and they said they really just wanted to be streaming Game Pass and from their Xbox. And that's a pretty easy set of circumstances to figure out recommendations for, which I think is pretty nice. And I was still able to give them like 3 options. Here are all these different price ranges, starting from like $50 up to your $150 and $200 if you want to splurge. You can get the Nothing CMF one.
Right.
But I appreciate that we have so many of these options, right? Like you just got the Powkiddy. That thing just for Game Boy is going to be amazing.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of the sweet spot for me with emulation. So that's kind of why I pulled the trigger in the end too, is because I'm kind of deep into Game Boy Advance games right now, and that's where I want to spend the rest of my summer, and this will be perfect for that. We should talk a little bit about the Miyoo Mini A30 because you and I have had very different experiences. And I would like to compare notes about our experiences. And this all began with a sale on AliExpress where I had seen it online, but I didn't know when it started. Then you sent me a message and told me, you can get this thing now for $30. And at $30, it was kind of a no-brainer. I wanted to try it because I haven't had any horizontal Linux-based game devices before. So I wanted to kind of have that experience. I also was attracted to the size, which is kind of Game Boy Micro inspired, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's very, very small. And it took a very long time to get here, but I do have mine and mine's up and running. You had more difficulty than I did though.
I sure did. Yeah. So that was AliExpress's like version of Amazon Prime Day.
Yep.
So they had a bunch of stuff on sale. The Miyoo A30 generally is selling for around like $60 to $70. So seeing it for 30 was kind of a no-brainer for me also. And I ordered one and waited for it to show up in the mail. It didn't show, kind of similar to the Odin Mini, like just didn't show up on the day it was supposed to, like 3 or 4 days in a row. And then it did show up and I started messing with it. And literally the second I took it out of the box and got my hands on it, I thought, oh my God, this thing rocks. Like I love this thing. It feels so good in the hand. I was so excited about it. And I've also, because of who I am and who we are, have spent a lot of time watching a lot of video reviews and reading a lot of kind of takes on this thing. It's kind of had a rags to riches story, I would say, where
It really has.
A lot of people really didn't like it when it came out, specifically because the operating system, the stock operating system that Miyoo is shipping with this thing, is not very good, and it's not optimized at all for the devices that it's supposed to be able to play. What they are claiming is that it'll play things like PlayStation 1 and N64 and PSP and kind of that era of video games and Dreamcast and things like that. When the reality was really not that beautiful at all, because
No.
things like the Super Nintendo were starting to chug on the original stock operating system. So what I knew as soon as I picked it up and took it out of the box, I turned it on, I was messing around with it, I launched some stuff and was like, oh yeah, this doesn't feel very good. I knew that I should switch to some custom firmware and started to mess around with some custom firmware. And over the course of, I would say, 3 to 4 hours of trying, realized over time that the SD card slot on my model was mostly broken. It wasn't so broken that it didn't recognize there was an SD card in there, but it was broken enough that whenever I tried to install new custom firmware, it would unmount the SD card. And sometimes, this was the big giveaway for me, sometimes I would turn the device on, and if you went into the device settings and there's like an about this device section, you can check and see how much storage is left on your SD card, and it would say unmounted. It just literally said unmounted there, even though there was an SD card in there. So what's wild is this is the second Miyoo device I've purchased from AliExpress that had exactly this problem. I had this problem with the original Miyoo Mini as well, where I ordered one from AliExpress on sale, it showed up, and the SD card wouldn't mount. So in both cases, like the Miyoo Mini and also the Miyoo A30, I just ordered another one. And I got it in the mail, and it is mostly great, is what I'll say about it. But I want to hear a little bit more about how you're feeling about it so far.
Yeah, I think mostly great is a very good description of this. I love this device for its size. I think that the buttons and the D-pad and the shoulder buttons, they all feel good. I mean, I think that this is definitely going to be the device that I take with me to Europe for a week, because it'll fit in my pocket. It won't take up any meaningful space or weight in my bag. It's perfect for that. What I will say though, that the build quality is not super, in that I can kind of hear it rattling a little bit when I shake it.
Yeah.
My shoulder buttons, the left ones are maybe a little, they shift left and right a little bit more than the right ones. That's probably the weakest point of the buttons. And the home button on the top is askew. Like the little house on the home button is diagonal on mine.
Oh, really?
Which bothers me a lot.
That's really funny.
It's not one of those buttons that you look at. You're not looking at the top of your device very often, but it's twisted to the side. But that said, I got this in the mail. Unlike my last device that I ordered from AliExpress, it actually came fairly quickly and didn't take too long once it was in the United States to get down to North Carolina. And I immediately took out the stock. Actually, this came without an SD card in it. I got the model without a micro SD card. And so I put in my own, and I loaded up Spruce, which is a operating system that you had recommended to me. And I've been pretty happy with it. It's very minimal. It's not, I think, I like Onion OS better, but that's not available for this device right now. And Spruce has been good to me. I mean, it loads up relatively quickly and it's easy to navigate. And I mean, I think one of the things about this device is it's not super easy to get like box art on it, for instance. I mean, that's something you kind of have to load up on the SD card yourself.
Right.
which isn't ideal. There's no
It's
way
not
to,
as easy for Mac users, I'll say.
yeah,
For Windows, it's a lot easier.
right. So it's not as easy to scrape the box art and put that in your, but it's not terrible. I mean, what I did is I just moved games over from another SD card, and that wasn't too difficult
Right.
because that SD card already had a lot of the box art on it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and Spruce, thankfully, is calibrated to this device specifically, which is nice. The developer working on that has made sure that all of the devices that Miyoo says should be able to run on this thing will run on this thing.
Yep.
Your mileage will vary depending on when you get into those higher range devices. So things like the N64 and PS1 and PSP, it'll be kind of on a game by game basis how well they run. And that, unfortunately, is just kind of a byproduct of Miyoo deciding to go with a less powerful chip on this than they did with the Miyoo Mini, which is such a strange decision. I think this is the biggest confusion point for me with the A30 is the idea that it's not just the exact same chip as the Miyoo Mini, but in a horizontal form factor. That's really all they needed to do. And as we've seen with Anbernic, once you get a great chip like that, because every XX device that Anbernic is releasing right now, they all have the same, I think it's H700 chip or H7000 chip in them. Those things run like a dream, and all they're doing is throwing that chip in different form factors and allowing them to thrive. It's so weird that Miyoo decided to not do that with this. So, some things that work wonderfully on the Miyoo Mini Plus, which I own, do not run as well here. And I think most notably, as you brought up, Onion OS, which I think in a lot of ways is probably the best custom firmware anyone has made for any of these devices, is just not available here. And it's unclear if it ever will be available here.
Yeah, I do wonder whether maybe the different chip is like a size and heat issue, perhaps something like that, or battery life, or whatever it happens to be. Who knows? But yeah, one of the things that I found funny about, I've found funny about getting into these retro handhelds more is that you can really go down a rabbit hole of finding all the perfect box art and making sure all your metadata is perfect, and you end up in a place that's very much like iTunes, where people used to actually own and collect their own music, and they would go in and edit the metadata, make sure they had the right album art, the best quality images and all that. And I was that person at one time. Eventually, I just let it all go because I was spending more time curating than I was actually listening. And I have started to feel like I'm going to end up in the same place with these older games that I'm emulating because, I want some nice box art. I'd like to be able to see the box art for the game I'm playing. On the other hand, you can endlessly tweak this stuff.
Yeah, you really, really can. And I think maybe that's actually a good segue into the custom firmware I've been using for the A30, which is called MinUI, which is one that's been around for a while and is available on a bunch of different handhelds. But I decided to go with MinUI over Spruce because Spruce reminded me a bit of MooOS, which is the firmware I'm using.
Yeah, it's a lot like that.
Yeah, it's the firmware I'm using on the SP and also the 28XX, which I'll talk about in a second. But MinUI is just like the most bare bones, simplest operating system I have seen for one of these devices. And honestly, it's really solid. So you just power up the device and immediately just shows you a pretty well-designed list of all of the consoles that you can run. And then you just, click on one, click on a game, it boots up. If you press the home button, it just gives you a little kind of overlay screen that's like, do you want to save state? Do you want to load state? Do you want to quit the game? And those are really your only options. It just makes the act of jumping into and out of games very, very simple, which I think for a device this small is kind of ideal for me. I think, you get some trade-offs here and there. There are some consoles that are not supported on MinUI. Like, I think N64 is one of them. I might be wrong about that. I know PSP isn't available there. And you also can't utilize Wi-Fi. So if you're somebody who likes retro achievements, which I am not one of those people, but I have dabbled here and there, you just can't use Wi-Fi at all on the device, despite it having a Wi-Fi chip in it. So there are some trade-offs there, but also, like, this is the device that goes in my pocket and is just with me at all times. I don't need this, if I'm playing this on the subway where I don't even have cell service, I don't need Wi-Fi, definitely. So I don't really mind that as much. The thing that I do mind about the A30, and I'm curious if you run into this also, it doesn't turn on all the time. Like it's a little bit more difficult to turn on than it should be. Do you have this problem?
Yeah, I do. I looked at the instruction manual. It was bad enough that I was like, what am I missing here? And it's like, it says you have to hold it for 3 seconds.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a recessed button to begin with. So it's very easy. I'm not sure if I'm like maybe not pressing it directly enough, or if it's just like not a very good switch or what it is. But yeah, it can be hard to turn on.
Which, again, for me, when I'm, sitting down on the subway or something, or when I'm, the other day I was standing outside of a theater waiting for a show to start, I just couldn't get the thing to turn on. And as I continued sitting there trying to hold the thing down and being like, am I not pressing it right? Like, what am I doing? Am I coming at it at an angle? And then, okay, do I have something in my pocket I can use?
Do I have to
like,
jam
push?
my fingernail in there?
Yeah,
or
exactly. And the more I was doing that and the more it wasn't turning on, I just got to a point where I was like, well, I guess I'm just not going to play anything right now then. And that is the worst case scenario for a device like this. I think.
Yeah.
It's built in a form factor that is supposed to fit into your life in any free moment, and you can't get the thing to turn on. And when it does, it takes a long time to boot stuff up and get into games, which thankfully MIUI kind of subverts. But the thing about the A30 that I just want to shout out is that the feel in the hand is amazing. The buttons
really
are awesome. The shoulder buttons are great and feel like they're in the exact spot that you need them to be. The analog stick feels a lot better than I was expecting. I was playing some Tony Hawk the other day, and that was like great. The D-pad feels really good. Start and select are like in the spots that you want them to be. It's like, as we said, it's almost great. It is so close to being exactly the device that I want, but this custom firmware stuff and the chip inside being not as powerful as I need it to be are like, oh man, they're just so frustrating. It's like the most, like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed I've ever been in a handheld like this.
Yeah.
Because it's so close to being there.
I'll tell you one other thing that would make this a lot better would be a better glass on the screen, because having had oleophobic screens on my iPhone for so many years, this thing's a bit of a fingerprint magnet, and so you end up. At least I do. I end up rubbing it with my t-shirt a lot and trying to clean it up a little bit. But it's, that's kind of a nitpick. I see where you're coming from on MIUI. I might give that a try, because when you do have box art for a game, there's just not a lot of room on the screen for it. So it ends up truncating the names of the games in your list. So you can obviously see the game that you've highlighted with the D-pad, but you can't see the ones below it as well because of the box art being there. So, I've got like Legend of Zelda Minish Cap here, and it's got the box art, and my Legend of Zelda A Link to the Past, it just says A Link To. There's a lot of the stuff gets cut off below it. So
yeah. I want to give one other shout out to the Anbernic 28XX, which is Anbernic's version of a handheld that is in this form factor. So I got this similarly on, I think, it was an AliExpress sale for, I think, somewhere around $30 or $40. I got it around the same time I got the SP, because I was curious at the idea of the same exact chip in that thing powering a device this small. Were you going to run into battery issues? Were you going to run into heat issues? And this thing has been pretty much my constant companion for like over a month and a half, 2 months at this point. It has a lot of issues as well. And that's, I think, the biggest bummer about both of these devices is that, like, if you could smash them together, they would make one perfect handheld. But the buttons are really small. The D-pad is really small. The shoulder buttons are placed in maybe the worst place possible, to the point where I would not recommend getting this device if you want to play any games that require shoulder buttons at all. But it is powerful enough, again, to be playing things in the PSP realm, like, very well, because that's how powerful the chipset is in here. And the screen is great, and it also supports MuOS, which I think is very quickly coming up on the heels of Onion OS as, I think, maybe my favorite operating system available for these things.
Yeah, agreed.
And on top of that, it has 2 SD card slots, which means that I can just have MuOS installed on one SD card on my SP and on my 28XX, and then just move my ROMs and my save files back and forth between each of the devices, just by moving the other SD card. It's really frustrating because I don't love the buttons on this thing, but it, first of all, turns on in a way that is predictable, which I think is great.
That's good.
And also, and as you're saying, you're playing this mostly for Game Boy Advance. I've been playing mostly Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on mine. For a device that I'm just playing that stuff on, I don't really need the shoulder buttons at all. And I don't even really need the buttons themselves to be that huge. It is definitely a little bit more uncomfortable than I would like, but it's not so uncomfortable that I wouldn't recommend it to people. Right now, for me, I think Miyoo OS on the 28XX is what I would recommend over the A30, which is kind of a bummer. And I'm hoping that custom firmware will continue to push the A30 in a direction that will make me want to recommend it to more people. But even just in the hand, the 28XX feels sturdier and feels a little bit better. It's just a question of what do you want to be playing on it, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, it's early days with the A30. I wouldn't be surprised if the OS situation improves over the course of the summer. I'm definitely going to keep my eyes open for it. Spruce is good. Mini UI sounds great.
Yeah,
but it would be nice to have a few more options as well.
Yeah.
All right, Brendon, to close things out today, I want to share something that I saw in Threads by Roman Lefebvre, who's a developer of an iOS app that I love called Sequel. Sequel's a media save for later type of app where you can save, you can plan out what TV shows, movies, video games, books, other things that you want to enjoy later. And Roman went down this rabbit hole of putting together a 2DS XL, and he wanted one that is black and white. And so Roman took, I think it was a white 2DS XL that was in white with lilac buttons, and a Dragon Quest Special Edition 2DS XL, which had a black interior on the uppercase and a black band around the edge, and mashed them together and got some new buttons, some black buttons, got a new thumbstick for the right side of the device.
It's a PSP thumbstick, which is an incredible idea.
It is an incredible idea. I would never in a million years have thought to do this, but it makes a lot of sense with it being right there hard up against the buttons. And mashed these two things up and came up with what to me is just an absolutely stunning 2DS XL. It's not new hardware. It's old hardware in a new configuration, putting together these two different DSs that never existed in this configuration, but now does. And it looks great in black and white.
Yeah, it looks amazing. Yeah, Roman, I think, hit us up when the first episode of NPC came out and was like, I have this wild idea, and I think I'm going to try and put this together. And I was like, please keep me informed. And I think it breaks my heart a little bit that a Dragon Quest edition 2DS had to die. I'm a big Dragon Quest
I know you are. I thought of you when I saw the pictures.
I have always wanted a Dragon Quest 2DS. So the fact that one had to get sacrificed to make this is a little bit sad, but honestly, this thing is so pretty. And I love when people make devices like this, or at least mash up devices like this, because it just creates a situation where it's like, Nintendo, where are you at? Why are you not making this?
Right.
Like, you got people who have taste on your staff. What happened here? But this thing is amazing. And I honestly think, the 3DS and the 2DS specifically are just some devices that are like, right now in the perfect spot of cheap enough to get your hands on and mess with, that if you build something like this, it will, be a companion for you kind of forever.
Yep.
I was messing around a lot with my new 3DS non-XL the other day because I was dumping all my other 3DS games that I hadn't dumped yet, just so I could like back them up and stuff and get all the save files off there. Because I'm starting to get to the point where I'm like worried that the device might start to fail at some point because I've had it for so long.
Yeah.
I've used
I did that over
so
Christmas. I did the same thing over Christmas. I pulled everything off of it.
Yeah. And now that I've seen this, I'm like, do I just get a backup 3DS or 2DS just to kind of, make sure that there's always one on hand for me in case I need one. And if I do something like that, do I do something like this? I have not gotten into modding. I don't know if you have. I've not gotten into modding. The most I've done is I've opened, as I mentioned, I opened up my SP and put some new buttons in, and that's like the most I've ever quote unquote modded anything.
Brendon, I am so close to getting into that scene, and I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos, especially with the Game Boy Advance and the Game Boy Advance SP and the Game Boy Color, and modding those devices. They're essentially now, even if you want to, you can even buy new boards, pull the chips off of old boards and solder every single pin on those chips onto a new board. That takes some actual skill, I think, and like a big magnifying glass. But yeah, I've been thinking about it. I don't have the time for it right now, and I may dive into it at some point. But looking at like what Roman did here, it really inspires me to do something similar. I don't think that Roman was, doing soldering for this necessarily, but it is a pretty cool look. And I never had a 2DS XL. I have a 3DS XL, and I do kind of regret not picking up one of the special editions that were done kind of near the end of the life of that system, whether it's the Super Nintendo style one or the white and orange one, or maybe the Pikachu one. There were a lot of really interesting models done, and some of those now you can still buy them for like $400 or $500 on secondhand in box. But yeah, I didn't actually pull the trigger on any of those. That's why that's a reason right there to maybe pick up that Zelda Switch Lite that was announced not too long ago.
It's a great point. Yeah, I picked up the non-XL new 3DS when that came out, specifically because they had the swappable faceplates on them. Because I really love the idea of customizing a device like this. And I think the 3DS specifically, that whole life cycle of Nintendo consoles, they invested so much time and energy into allowing you to customize the stuff. Not really even on the hardware side, but also on the software side. You could buy themes and get little icons that you could put around your home screen and stuff. I really miss that. And I think
what happened to that? I mean, I think that was really popular with a lot of people.
This is a big thing that Steven and I talk about on Into the Aether all the time, is like, why does the Switch have a section in its settings called themes, and the only two themes are light and dark?
Yeah, I know. It's terrible.
It drives me up the wall that there's no like fun noises or music or anything. They just like dropped that entire. It's like the best-selling Nintendo system ever, and they just totally forgot to like make the user experience really fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, I love modded, customized devices like this. I have a custom Game Boy Advance that I got from a friend, Kyle Starr. I'll give you a shout out. Who
Yep, I know Kyle.
Made a bunch of custom devices for us, which was really nice for Into the Aether. And ever since receiving that, I've always thought to myself, like, maybe one day I'll just go in and like get all the devices I really love and just kind of mod them a little bit so they're a little more unique to me.
Yeah, it's a real rabbit hole. There's all kinds of equipment you can get, and and all
I already have the
parts.
iFixit set of screwdrivers. And
I
stuff.
do have that, yes. I'm well on my way, I suppose. I need to get a good soldering iron. I actually used to have a lot of that stuff back when I lived in Illinois, but when we moved, we got rid of it all. It was mostly for my kids, but
check in with this show in 365 days time, and I'm excited. Honestly, dear listener, hold us to our word, and bring up this clip of this episode in 1 year if both of us are modding stuff at that point.
Yes. You never know. I personally think that Federico will be doing something along these lines as well, too, at some point.
Federico's achieved a higher plane of modding. He's so close to building the Tower of Babel, I think, at this point.
He really is. And with his MacPad, which combines a MacBook Air and an iPad Pro, in the fall, with Mac OS Sequoia, he'll be able to mirror his iPhone onto that Mac, and he will have a Mac, an iPhone, and an iPad all running on the same hardware at the same time.
This is what I mean. You and I are going to be over here like messing with the Game Boy Advance and like, look what I made. And Federico's going to be like, I didn't know that ants could speak.
Right, exactly. All right, Brendon. Well, that's a good episode. I think we will wrap it up there. We will have Federico back on the next episode, so don't worry. He's fine. He will make his grand entrance as he tends to do next episode. I want to let you know that you can find the two of us over on social media. Of course, just look for Brendon Bigley. That's what you are in most places, and I'm at John Voorhees in most places. And Brendon's got his website, wavelengths.online, which you can go visit that and see some of his writing. And of course, Into the Aether, his podcast with Stephen Hilger. And I'm over at macstories.net. So that's it for this episode. Talk to you soon, Brendon.
Yeah, you too, John. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye-bye.